Welcome back, Honors. All right, so it's Thursday. It's Baby Friday, right? We're getting after it. We're moving forward. So we spent most of class today talking about Columbus and his voyages into what was known as the New World, right? We talked about his motivations. We talked about him seeing gold as a possibility of a great resource that would be found in these new areas. We talked about how he believed he was in Asia for most of this time period, right? How he believed he was on the outskirts of Asia, right? Over close towards the China, which is kind of ridiculous in our modern day perspective, but of course at the same time, did he know any better? Could he have known any better? Not really in particularly, right? So also we took some time talking about the violence and some of the crimes committed by some of the Spanish colonists. Talked about, of course, like the hawk's bells, right? Having to be filled with gold dust, or some of the natives' hands could be cut off. We talked about the spread of disease and things like that. Speaking of, really quick, disease, we need to jot those diseases down. All right, so we know that Columbus was, of course, the first wave of people known as conquistadors, right? So Conquistadors, which are Spanish conquerors, right? So with them, they brought like a lot of advantages and diseases with them, right? So now disease not being an advantage for them, I guess it could be in a sense if your direct motivation is conquest, but their main advantages are the following. Jot these things down. They brought with them guns, cannons, and horses, right? So as well as forged metals and science and technology that the natives, quite frankly, just didn't have. And then also, speaking of the diseases, there are three main diseases that they brought with them as well, unintentionally, right? So they brought with them smallpox, influenza, and malaria, right? Or not malaria, excuse me, measles, all right? Malaria, that's been around for a long time. Now, anyway, so these are some things that are going to drastically affect the native populations when Columbus comes into contact with them, right? So, but like we said, he starts to get very gold hungry. He starts to adopt the policy of conquest. He starts enslaving indigenous people in Hispaniola, which is like where the DR and Haiti are now. So throughout the Caribbean, he starts massively enslaving people. He actually attempted to bring several hundred slaves back to Spain. A lot of those slaves died en route, and these are all native indigenous people to the Caribbean, known as the Taino people, right? Taino, also sometimes known as the Arawaks, right? So extreme violence is going to be, more than anything, allowed, all right? So Columbus is a heavily debated figure due to the fact that he is not a great person when it comes to human rights negotiations and treatment of people that he came into contact with, right? Because one of the first things he's going to try and do is convert them to his religion. He's going to start trying to take advantage of their resources. He's going to start trying to enslave them. Violence will be committed against them. However, the colonists he brought with him were much worse than he was, right? The colonists he brought with them began to commit way more violence than anyone ever anticipated, right? So the colonists he brought with them began to kill natives in much larger numbers, kidnap them, hunt them down, assault them, continue to commit very egregious acts of violence, so much so that when Columbus came back to the islands on his second voyage, right, he couldn't stop them because they had already gotten so stirred up. A revolt broke out because Columbus then tried to execute some of the colonists that were still there, along with some of the natives that were there as well. So this is going to lead to a huge royal investigation. The Castillo family, underneath Isabella and Ferdinand, are going to see that he is eventually brought back after a couple of his voyages in chains. So Columbus actually died never actually seeing what you would call the modern-day United States. He may have stepped foot in Mexico. We're not absolutely sure, but he actually kind of died in disgrace, right? He came back after being arrested. This thing's driving me nuts. He came back after being arrested, and he left behind like a legacy of course, leading to the world as we know it today, but then also leaving behind a lot of violence and a lot of misdoings, right? So control of his discoveries are going to pass to the royals, and he died thinking China was right around the corner, right? So Columbus, unfortunately, though, is going to die from what we believe is reactive arthritis and several other health complications, but he's going to die eventually in Spain. Now, anyway, now we're going to talk about what I need you to do. Only write these things down in the order that I go in, right? So don't write this down yet. Don't write this down yet, all right? So go ahead and write down late explorers and pushing in, right? So late explorers are guys we're going to talk about that came after Columbus. 2 players, and then also kind of setting up a couple of different little things as we go forward as well, right? So late explorers include guys like this dude, Amerigo Vespucci, which in a sense you could say is not even really so much of an explorer. He's much more of a cartographer, right? So Cartographer. Cartographers are map makers, right? So Amerigo Vespucci is credited with the names of North and South America, right? So this is due to the fact that we believe he was the very first cartographer to not discover North and South America, not to make the maps of all of them, but he's the first person to publish writings saying that they're not a series of islands, and this is not the outskirts of Asia. This is 2 brand new continents that we didn't even know existed, right? So Amerigo Vespucci, the Latin feminine version of his name, America, was then adopted for the 2 new continents, North and South America, named for Amerigo Vespucci, the guy who realized that they're 2 brand new continents. But then you got this, like, whole thing showing up, right? The Treaty of Tordesillas, right? So the Treaty of Tordesillas is a very, very intense, very important little thing that's going to happen, right? Tordesillas. Let's double check on the years because I want to make sure that I'm getting these right. Yeah. So the Treaty of Tordesillas was drawn up almost immediately after Columbus's voyages into the New World, right? So once Amerigo Vespucci realizes that they're 2 brand new continents, once everybody starts to realize that there are resources there, the Pope, Alexander VI, steps up and says, I have to keep Spain and Portugal from going to war with one another, right? So what he does is he draws up this thing called the Treaty of Tordesillas, right? Now the thing about the Treaty of Tordesillas is it's all economically motivated, right? So you got Let's try that. Let's try green. There we go. We got North America, right? We got South America. Can y'all see that? You can't see that either. This is ridiculous. All right, here we go. Black. There we go. Black always works best on the board anyway. Now, here we go. So, you got Europe, Asia, Africa, right? You got Australia that they didn't even really know existed yet. But you have the entire expanse of the world, right? You have North America, South America now, Europe, Asia, Africa. The Treaty of Tordesillas is going to be drawn up by Pope Alexander VI, and it's going to be a treaty that establishes a line of sorts, right? And that line is going to be called the line of demarcation. So Alexander VI has a line drawn to try and separate Spain and Portugal from going to war with one another. Because remember, Spain and Portugal are devoutly Catholic countries, right? So if they're very, very Catholic, that means they're paying their tithes regularly. And if Spain and Portugal have just discovered 2 new ways to make tons of money, that means the Catholic Church stands to make a lot of money, right? So the line of demarcation is going to be drawn under the Treaty of Tordesillas in around 1494. And Spain is going to get this half of the world, right? And Portugal is going to get this half of the world. It's a lot like that Full House episode where Stephanie and DJ have to separate their rooms, right? And they're like, I'm going to draw a line down the middle, and this is my half, and this is your half. Don't touch any of my stuff. So this is to prevent the 2 of them from going to war. Now, funny enough, this is just a little fact that everybody should know. The line was drawn slightly inaccurately because if you ever look at it on a map, that's Brazil. The line cut the tip of Brazil off, right? So the tip of Brazil went to Portugal. The Portuguese are eventually going to colonize that area, push into Brazil. That's why Brazilians speak Portuguese, right? So, but the line of demarcation is very important. And then you had Magellan, right? Magellan shows up in 1519. He's a Portuguese sailor. He's the guy that tries to circumnavigate the globe first, right? So circumnavigation means to sail all the way around the world, right? All the way around. So thing about Magellan's voyage is it lasts from about 1519 to about 1523. and he sails for Portugal, right? So, but he goes all the way around, and he eventually ends up down in, this is a couple of little neat facts about him. His voyage successfully does this. They circumnavigate the entire globe. But he ends up down here at the bottom of Chile, right down here, like at the bottom of Chile in a place called Cape Horn, right? So when he got there, there was a massive amount of storms. Now, Cape Horn is down at the bottom end of South America. When he got there were so many storms that he thought his voyage was going to be lost, right? There was a revolt on one of his ships. He thought everything was going to be lost. But then when he got to the opposite side of Cape Horn, he ends up looking out and seeing a peaceful water, right? An ocean that was flat and tranquil and amazing. So he named it the Pacific Ocean, right? So that's where the Pacific Ocean gets its name. And then also he continues to sail. He eventually runs into these islands called the Philippines, right? Now, they weren't called the Philippines yet, but he ends up running into the modern-day Philippines. There, in about 1522, he tries to convert them to Christianity, and then they kill him and cut his head off, right? So Magellan didn't even make the entire trip all the way around, right? He didn't circumnavigate the globe on his own. His voyage finished, right? His boats got all the way back around, but he actually died about halfway through, right? So, but that's Ferdinand Magellan, right? So then you've got some other people like early French and English explorers, right? French and English are going to start trying to discover a lot more things up here in North America because Spain is going to focus on Central America and South America. And some of you are like, well, wait a minute. France is still Catholic. How come they get to cross the line of demarcation? Well, the Spanish had no intention of going to this area of North America, nor did they know it even existed. So there's no way that you can police two whole continents, right? So Spain focused all of its efforts in Central America and South America, but North America is going to see some early expeditions from the French and the English. Now, unfortunately, these early expeditions from the 1590s to the 1570s are not very solid, right? They don't grow populations very well, if at all. They weren't really colonies. They were just what I said, expeditions, right? They were seeing what was there. And the only things they really found there, which prevented them from truly trying to colonize the area for so long, were two things. Furs, mostly from beavers, muskrats, and other types of wild game, and cod, right? A huge amount of cod, which is a very, very meaty, large fish, right? So they started trying to sell those things, but then later on in the 1600s, they're going to start colonization efforts of their own, right? And then you've got this last area over here, the Moluccas Islands, right? So the Moluccas Islands are this region of the world right here, known mostly to known as the Spice Islands, right? And the Dutch are going to try and get involved over there. Now, really, really quickly, just so you know who the Dutch people are, the Dutch are from the Netherlands, right, which is to the west of Germany and to the north of Belgium in modern-day Europe. But the Dutch are going to set up shop in the Moluccas Islands, right, also known as the Spice Islands, okay? And we will come back to those guys a little bit later, but you just need to know what the world's kind of looking like. And tomorrow when you come into class, we're going to throw that big world map up there. I'm going to draw some lines. Your warm-up is going to be based off a map. So get ready for that, all right? And make sure you didn't mute this and make sure you got all the extra notes, and we will go over everything tomorrow. I will see you guys then. Have a great one.